pikërisht tani. Pra do të shkojmë më njëherë në lidhje me Washingtonin me Todd Wood, duke falendruar Kadidën, Kokën dhe Abidekajn, e ndjekim këtë intervistë.
Reporters in Eastern Europe. Albania is one of the nations in the Balkan region, which is a very volatile region, and so we've focused our efforts there because it impacts the rest of the Balkans and also Eastern Europe in general. And it's also one of the nations which is controlled by the Soros regime, like Ukraine and others, which impacts directly the United States and the world. So that is why we focused here.
Ndikohet drejt për drejt nga politikat e Amerikës, sepse po thoni ndikohet edhe nga regjimi Soros. E keni bindje se George Soros ka kaq ndikim në politikën e jashtme amerikane?
Well, the world needs to understand, and they will over the next few months, that we had a coup in the United States last fall in November, and we do not have a legitimate government at this time. That is part of what is called the Great Reset across the world. George Soros is very involved in this. We believe that China is also very involved through cyber attacks, literally acts of war against the United States, which has caused us to have a government which does not represent the will of the American people. And the State Department, which is focused on in bringing about the agenda of this regime, is also controlled by Soros and others, which is highly obvious in Eastern Europe. So this is a real crisis in the United States and the world. And yes, Soros is highly involved in this and his organization.
Zoti Uz, ju po thoni se në Shtetet e Bashkuara të Amerikës me 3 nëntor kishte një grusht shteti. Në mënyrë veçantë për Europën, juglindore është e paperceptueshme që në Amerikë të ndodhë grushteti. Kemi një president i cili ka dalë nga zgjedhjet e 3 nëntorit dhe i përshëndetur nga të gjithë homologët botëror, global, edhe nga çdo kryetar shteti në Europën juglindore. Pyetja e parë, në qoftë se në Shqipëri presidenti i Republikës po kërkohet të shkarkohet sepse e konsideron regjim qeverinë e Edi Ramës, ndërsa një gazetar i njohur në Amerikë nuk e ka problem ta konsideroj grusht shteti 3 nëntorin e vitit kaluar në Shtetet e Bashkuara të Amerikës. Si mund të jetë grusht shteti kur gjithmonë duke referuar dhe krahasimisht Shqipërisë, kur një gazetar me reputacion është kaq i lirë ta konsideroj grusht shteti? Ju s'keni asnjë penalitet?
Well, first of all, the Rama government is very involved in what is happening. He's obviously close to Soros. He went to his wedding. As far as pressure on journalists, I think you should understand that most of the corrupt or corporate media in the United States and in Europe, for that matter, are working off the same page. It's become more of a propaganda machine, similar to Soviet Pravda. There are some independent journalists, but they are being pressured. The Biden regime is talking about coming after them in different ways, using the tax authority, etc. So we still have 2 different schools of thought in the United States. Unfortunately, the people in power right now are trying to consolidate this power as quickly as possible. I think the world needs to see that the 6 states that gave the election to Biden are going to be audited. They are being audited forensically at this point. This news is not being broadcast to the world, but I think in the next few weeks you will see legitimately that the counts in Arizona, in Georgia, in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, and elsewhere were fraudulently counted, and that Biden is not a legitimate president. Then we will be in a very constitutional crisis, and I don't know how it's going to play itself out, but it is definitely a crisis here in this country.
Në vend ke një periudhë krize, kur ju pretendoni se ka një krizë në Amerikë, imagjino se ku jemi ne në Europën juglindore.
Well, yes. I'm embarrassed, to be honest, as an American. I was a military officer in the U.S. Air Force. There are lots of former military which are getting involved to correct the situation because they are trying to change our military as quickly as possible into a culturally Marxist organization. This great reset globally, which China is behind, is trying to turn the greatest republic in the world into a Marxist state, and we are not going to allow that. So that is the type of crisis we were in. Of course, it's going to impact Eastern Europe. We understand that fully, but we have to get our house in order so that we can help the world going forward. But the State Department, which is allegedly representing the United States, does not represent the will of the American people. It represents a globalist organization which has nefarious ends.
Zoti Wood, unë kam pas një intervistë para zgjedhjeve të 3 nëntorit Steve Bannon. Edhe ai si ju mendonte se Partia Komuniste Kineze është një organizatë terroriste. Kina po ndikon në zgjedhjet në Amerikë. Ju po thoni se Joe Biden nuk është një president i zgjedhur, është i emëruar nga një regjim. Po thoni gjithashtu se George Soros e drejton Departamentin e Shtetit. Gjithsesi, këto janë konstatime që i bëni ju nga Amerika, ne nga Shqipëria nuk kemi si t'i provojmë dhe edhe kemi pak të vështirë t'i marrim të mirëqen. Të paktën në një gjë, faktori politik shqiptar bie e gjithë dakord. Ka uruar dhe njeh si president legjitim Joe Biden. Pyetja është kjo. Në gjykimin tuaj, a mendoni se si ju gjykojnë shqiptarët kur bëni këto deklarata kaq të forta për Shtetet e Bashkuara të Amerikës? Kur them shqiptarët, po them edhe popullata e Europës juglindore.
Well, I lost you there, but you know, it's obvious that the Rama government is involved with Soros. Like I said, he went to his wedding. The State Department has been promoting this socialist regime, and I don't know the legality of the recent elections in Albania. I'm not aware of that information, but I would say that just being associated with Soros brings a lot of questions as to the legitimacy of this regime. And, you know, in the United States, like I said, we have a severe crisis. It's going to play itself out. I think within a year to two, things will go one way or the other. But China is definitely involved in this. Steve Bannon is exactly correct. China is a transnational criminal organization, organized crime, if you will. And a lot of dictators and malign governments around the world are aligning themselves with this in order to bring wealth to themselves and not the people. And that's the problem we see. And we don't want this in the United States.
Gjithsesi kthehemi në Shqipëri pasi ne kemi të vështirë të realisht të besojmë se Amerika është një regjim. Zot Wood, në vitin 2019 ju keni shkruar. Departamenti i Shtetit as nuk e ka kritikuar bashkëpunimin e dyshuar të qeverisë Rama me figura të krimit të organizuar, ka pasur një heshtje të çuditshme për polemika dhe pyetja është pse. Mund të jetë për shkak se departamenti në heshtje për krah agjendën liberale të George Soros sipas jush për kufi të hapur, legalizim drogash dhe qeverisë globale? Çfarë ju shtyn të sulmoni kaq fort George Soros?
Well, I've seen it in Ukraine specifically, where you have significant organized crime. Soros has a machine in Ukraine, and in Albania, and not so much as in Ukraine, but in Ukraine we have large numbers of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, which train people in the Soros organization. They take aid money from the United States. A lot of it is money laundered. And then these people are put into positions of power in the Ukrainian government. I would think a similar thing is going on in Albania, but it's just not as large of an organization. I mean, for instance, Soros' son Alex really controlled American foreign policy for several years in the Balkans, visiting all the different heads of state and, you know, making deals behind the scenes. So it's quite obvious if you look as to what is going on. And I would encourage your viewers to look at the audit and research online, the audit in Arizona, to find out what's happening in the United States.
Megjithatë, ju keni shkruar për bashkëpunimin e Ramës dhe qeverisë së tij me krimin organizuar për të fituar zgjedhjet në 2017-ën, sapo kishim zgjedhje, një muaj më parë. Ju pak më parë thatë se nuk jam i njohur tamam me se si u zhvilluan zgjedhjet. Por për ne në Shqipëri është përsëritje identike e 2017-ës. Unë e kuptoj se sot sipas jush kemi një administratë Biden që ka ndikim gjithmonë sipas jush të George Soros. Por deri në 2020 president i Shtetit të Bashkuara të Amerikës ishte Donald Trump. Departamenti i Shtetit drejtohej nga Mike Pompeo. Si ka mundësi që edhe gjatë kësaj kohe George Soros pas kaq shumë ndikim në Departamentin e Shtetit dhe ka drejtuar apo ka menaxhuar raport në qeverisë Rama me Departamentin e Shtetit?
Well, that's a good question, and people ask this a lot, and not just the State Department, but the military, our intelligence services, and other parts of the U.S. government. And let me say, for first, that it's not just Soros; it's really China behind this. Soros is just an enabler, a partner in what China is trying to do globally with their debt, diplomacy, and trying to control nations. But as regarding the State Department, what you need to realize and what your viewers need to realize is that Trump did not control most of the U.S. government while he was president. There were a lot of bureaucrats who were put into positions of power across the board by the Obama administration for 2 terms. And these people actively worked against Trump. And I would it's easy for me to say that Trump did not control the State Department, especially in Eastern Europe and Albania, where Soros has so much, power. Just look at the comments from the ambassadors and the chargé d'affaires over the last several years on Twitter. We wrote about this, where they mocked President Trump while supposedly his representative. And actively worked against the agenda the Trump administration was pushing. So no, we have the thing that the gift that Trump gave us was that he showed us, the American people, and the world what is happening. The mask is off. We know what these people are doing now, which they were doing very quietly for 2 decades. And now we have to either deal with it or not. But that's the problem we have here, and which also impacts the world and Albania.
Edi Rama duket se ka siguruar, jo duket, por ka siguruar një mandat tjetër, në fakt për zhgënjimin e shumë njerëzve dhe në mënyrë të veçantë të opozitës. Opozita pretendon se manipulimet, blerja e votave, bashkëpunimi me krimin organizuar, ndryshimet e njëanshme të kushtetutës bën të mundur fitoren e Ramës. Megjithatë, Departamenti i Shtetit e uroi qeverinë e Rama ende pa dalë rezultati përfundimtar. Pse e përkrah sipas jush Edi Ramën qeveria e Shteteve të Bashkuara të Amerikës?
Because the U.S. government currently is not legitimate, and they are for lack of a better term, in bed with Rama. In this region of the world, he is enabling their policies of this criminal regime we have in the United States. And so, of course, they're going to support them. But like I said, they were not supporting the agenda of Trump. There's plenty of evidence of that. We've written about it extensively. And, Donald Liu especially was not supporting Trump. And his follow-on, people in the State Department, in the embassy in Albania, they are not promoting the will of the American people. Your readers need to realize that. So we have to get control of our country, which we will. It's going to take some time. But Albanians need to know that if they oppose what is happening in this government, they need to, strength is in numbers, and they need to organize and work against it, just like the people of Britain finally won freedom from the EU, which is a socialist organization. Albania can do the same thing.
Donald Liu nuk e përkrahte presidentin Trump, po thoni, por Donald Liu në dijenin tim është i 5-ti ambasador në historinë e pas luftës së dytë botërore që ka rimarr mandat apo ka shkuar nga ambasador në ambasador, dhe kjo gjatë administratës Trump. Çfarë do të thotë se ishte shumë i privilegjuar nga administrata Trump?
Well, I'll say it again. The Obama people put in literally infiltrated most of our bureaucracy, and these are positions that cannot be fired by the chief executive. There's a long, lengthy process that has to go through for civil servants. So it is very difficult to get these people out of office. But like I said, Trump did not control most of the American government, especially the State Department. There's a very anti-Trump organization, and not even Trump. Trump was just a figure of the American populist movement, really taking back control of our government from this globalist organization and a regime that wants to basically build a world where there are lots of elites and all the people are serfs to these elites. We don't want this. This is not America's founding. Trump did not support this, but these people were not employing American foreign policy or Trump's foreign policy, and they still are not. So the fact that they existed under Trump means nothing, because he did not have the support.
Zoti Udz, autokratët kundër demokratëve, stabiliteti kundër demokracisë, a ka marrë fund demokracia liberale sipas jush dhe çfarë pritet tjetër?
It could be, if we do not, the United States has been the beacon of freedom and liberty in the world for over 200 years. There are millions of, 100 million Americans who want this to continue. It is a small minority that has control right now. So our challenge is to stop this regime from employing policies which we cannot recover from. They are opening our borders. They are spending us into oblivion to destroy our currency. They're destroying our military. We're not going to let this happen. So it could be, but I don't believe it will be. I think within 2 years, you'll see America strong and free, and that will be very good for the world in places like Albania, and we can once again be someone to earn your respect and to be proud of. But we're not that right now, unfortunately. As an American, I'm embarrassed to say this.
Dhe kush mendoni se është zgjidhja e rikthimit të Amerikës fort siç ju e dëshironi? Është Donald Trump një alternativë?
It could be Trump. He hasn't made a decision, but like I said, Trump was just the face of the movement, and the gift that he gave us was that he showed us how corrupt our government is. So we are mobilizing across the country in small groups, and we are taking back control of the party, the Conservative Party, from the ground up. And one of the problems is our conservative leadership is corrupt as well and taking money and being bribed and blackmailed. So we have to regain control of the party from the local level and then filter up that into the next election cycle. But at the same time, we have to show the world what happened with the fraud on November 3rd. This is not a legitimate government. That will be shown, in maybe not the corporate media, the big names like ABC, NBC, Bloomberg, because they're taking money from China. But independent media will show the results of the election that was fraudulent and that this is not a legitimate regime and does not represent the American people.
Megjithatë, me qenë se po përmendim mediat, edhe Fox, ku ju jeni shumë herë i ftuar si ekspert, kishte një raport apo një krisje me presidentin Trump gjatë zgjedhjeve. Çfarë po ndodh realisht me mediat në Amerikë?
Well, that's another interesting subject because over the last decade, the globalists have worked hard to undermine conservative media in the U.S. For instance, Rupert Murdoch, who started Fox News, is very elderly now. His sons have taken over and have changed the organization completely. Fox was involved in the coup, at least parts of it, in November by announcing Arizona way before even the votes were even in. So Fox News, some of the big aggregators like Drudge have been co-opted, unfortunately. But that leaves a lot of opportunity for independent media, like CD Media, and we are growing rapidly, and people are searching for truth. All the social media networks are against us, Facebook, Twitter. People should just get off those networks. They're basically surveillance for this globalist state. And, find independent and other ways of communicating and networking with people. That's highly important. But the American media will be reborn over the next 2 years, for sure.
Zoti Udz, kaq pesimist sa jeni për realitetin amerikan, ne që presim që orientimi i lirisë të jetë Amerika, ju po na thoni duhet prisni të çlirohet Amerika nga regjimi e pastaj edhe Europa juglindore të shikojë dritë. A e kuptoni sa pesimist është për Ballkanin kjo?
Well, I said that we have a very hard road. I'm speaking the truth. You won't get the truth from corporate media. So I'm telling you the truth, and this is what people need. You have to understand the reality before you can fix the problem. What I said was that I think in 2 years, America will be back again as a free beacon of liberty for the world and freedom. But we have a fight here. We have a corrupt government, a regime that was not legitimately elected, and they are trying to destroy the country. So people need to realize that, and when you see actions from the State Department or the U.S. Embassy in Tirana, you need to realize this is not the will of the American people. So I would say that gives Albanians hope that there are people in the U.S. who are behind them, but we have a problem. And it's really a global movement. I mean, look at what's happening in the UK. Look at what's, movements starting in Australia to New Zealand to push back against this, in India. This is a global reset. It literally is communism, and it has been a form of it, and it has been planned and executed for 2 decades. And there's a lot of nefarious actors behind this. And we have to confront it, and we will defeat it, but it will take some time, and we will be back. But right now, we have a problem.
Zot Juc, derisa ju të ktheheni ashtu siç ishit, a mos ndoshta edhe Ballkani do të kthehet ashtu siç ishte për të mos pas përplasje me Shtetet e Bashkuara të Amerikës? Pra në një farë forme në një komunizëm apo socializëm pak më të butë.
That's already happening. I mean, look at what's happening in Tirana, where you have oligarchs that are tearing down buildings that the people don't want torn down. I mean, this is exactly what I'm talking about, where a few elites, impose their will on the people. This is what communism was. Nobody really believed in communism during the Cold War. It was just a way for elites to maintain control and power and rape the country and steal the money. This is what is happening in China. It's not communism. It's state-sponsored, managed capitalism to a certain extent with a tyrannical regime that harvests people's organs while they're still alive if they're political prisoners. So this is what the world is coming to, and it's 1,000 years of darkness if we don't stop it. So this is what we are trying to do in the United States and the world. So we would join with the people of Albania to help fight this.
Kthehemi tek çështja e fundit, që në fakt është një lajm shumë i papritur. Sekretari i Shtetit Blinken ka shpallur Non Grata si të padëshiruar në Shtetet e Bashkuara të Amerikës, ish kryeministrin, ish presidentin dhe themeluesin e pluralizmit në Shqipëri, Sali Berishën. A keni ju një koment për këtë? Dhe si e gjykoni këtë vendim politik? Çfarë pasojash mund të ketë dhe çfarë mesazhesh jep administrata amerikane? Shiko, keq apo mirë, pluralizmi në Shqipëri, me të mira dhe me të këqijat e tij, ka fytyrën e Sali Berishës. Shpallja si i padëshiruar në Shtetet e Bashkuara të Amerikës e Sali Berishës, a mund të lexohet si mesazh i shpalljes Non Grata i pluralizmit 30 vjeçar shqiptar?
Well, when you realize that we have an illegitimate regime, the decision makes perfect sense. They don't want democracy. They don't want freedom in Albania. They want to control it. They want to run drugs. They want to run human trafficking through the country. So why would they want to support a liberal Democrat? I mean, that doesn't make sense at all. So of course they're going to try to marginalize the messenger. It's a classic Soviet tactic where you say anyone who is opposing you is a spy or is a criminal, or it's happening in the United States. The people that went to our capital to protest against this regime are still in solitary confinement in Washington, D.C. as we speak. People that had no weapons, no anything. One was executed. So this is a criminal regime, and I would not take anything they say as representative of the American people at all. So no, I would not say that what they have said against Berisha is true. I mean, I don't know the reality of his background, but I can say that this is a political decision.
Jeni sigur se është një vendim politik. Janusz Bugajski, një analist një njohës shumë i mirë i Ballkanit nga Shtetet e Bashkuara të Amerikës, shkruante se ky vendim më shumë do të lexohet si një vendim kundër shqiptarëve në rajon, pasi kemi kryeministra të dënuar si kryeministin kroat, ish kryeministin Maqedonas, kemi presidentin serb të akuzuar, presidentin malazez Gjukanovic të akuzuar, dhe asnjëri prej tyre nuk është shpallur Non Grata, sepse po të shpallësh gjithë i bie të shpallësh Non Grata Ballkanin. Zgjedhja e Berishës për të bërë këtë akt, sipas Bugajskit, duket si një vendim që lexohet si vendim kundër shqiptarëve në rajon. A keni ju një koment për këtë?
That's a more local I guess issue. I think it has less to do with the Albanian Serbian situation than it does with power and putting people in control and keeping them in control of what they want in order to run their organized crime rings. And to launder money, to traffic children, to traffic drugs. And so I don't see this as an Albanian issue. It's more of a pure power play in order to keep regimes in power that they can work with in the region. That is how I would see this.
Dhe çfarë pengese mund të ishte Sali Berisha I pensionuar për ta?
Well, he's not, but he represents something that is an obstacle. Anyone that looks to freedom, to democracy, to liberalism, to anything that is against a socialist, literally communist model, Marxist model, is going to be demonized. It's happening here. We are fighting back largely against it, that is the situation. So it really has nothing to do with his person. It has to do with what he possibly could represent, which is a threat to the global reset that I've talked about.
Zot Judz, Edi Rama, kryeministri I Shqipërisë në 2018 ka lënë të kuptojë se kjo dosje është bërë gati në atë kohë pra nga ambasada amerikane, nga Donald Lu ambasador, por që është refuzuar shpalla non grata nga sekretari Pompei. Një fakt I kryer me sekretarin Blinken. A keni ju informacion duke qenë se thatë e njohë mirë Shqipërinë, kam qenë disa herë, keni pas raporte me ambasadën. A keni ju një informacion se kur është bërë gati kjo dosje për Sali Berishën apo kur është vendosë të merret ky vendim?
No, I do not have information on that specific file, but it makes perfect sense. I mean, like I said, Trump did not control the government, but he was able to stop certain things that were obviously corrupt and not in the interest of the American people and in the interest of this organized crime ring that I've been discussing. So I would say any decisions made after Trump should be seen in that light and not based on the interests of the American people, but of this regime.
Zoti Udz, unë ju falenderoj shumë.
Thank you for your time. Take care.
Kemi qenë një intervistë drejt për drejt me Shtetet e Bashkuara të Amerikës, ku një prej analizave më të njohur për sa I përket njojeve të tij mbi rajonin, Todd Wood ka dhënë versionin e tij se pse pikërisht në këtë moment shpallët non grata Sali Berisha dhe madje shkon edhe më tej, pretendon se edhe në Amerikë kemi një regjim. Gjithsesi ky është një mendim I tij, shqiptarët kushdo qoftë ai që I qeverisë së Shtetit të Bashkuara të Amerikës janë një komb I lidhur shpirtërisht dhe pasgjithshmërisht me ta. Bashk natën e mirë, shihemi të hënë.